Hi guys, a former military scientist, now a regular high school teacher, ends up being taken far into the future in order to save all of mankind. In today's video, I will recap and explain to you the movie called The Tomorrow War, released in the year 2021. The film is set in the year 2022 on a cold December evening. We are introduced to Dan Forrester, who also has a daughter named Murray Forrester, and also a wife named Emmy Forrester. The Forrester family are celebrating Christmas Eve with their other friends and relatives and are all watching a soccer match live on TV. The guests are all enjoying themselves and having fun while watching the match. However, Dan goes outside on a business call with one of his possible employees. Dan has applied for a job at a prominent research facility. He's also a Green Beret who retired from the military about 15 years ago, but unfortunately his military history prevents him from being accepted to get his new job. Dan is saddened by the news and heads back inside. Dan sits down next to his daughter. Murray and Yuri tell Dan that everything is going to be all right. Just then, the TV begins to flicker, and just as a player is about to score, incredible blue light appears in front of the player in the stadium. As the light appears, it gets larger and begins to shake the entire stadium, and a group of people emerge from it as if it were some kind of portal. The group's leader is the last to emerge from the portal, and when she steps out, she tells them all that they are people who have traveled back in time, as they are soldiers from 30 years in the future, and that humanity is currently in a battle with an alien race known as the White Spikes. And if they lose this battle, all of humanity will be erased from Earth, leaving only the aliens to inhabit our lands. She tells them that they will need help fighting this war, and that they need to send people from the past in order to help win this fight. Everyone watching can't tell if this is some sort of joke or not, and are all taken aback by the shocking news. We then fast forward a year. All governments from every country have now developed jump facilities to build up their military force in the future. Once the announcements from the future were made, they complied with the people from the future and told them that they would send soldiers in order to fight the non-human species and help save the world. But only a handful of the many thousands sent into the future made it back alive. After that, global leaders decided to begin the first draft of personnel for the fight. The government now selects people to be sent into the future to fight the extraterrestrial species known as White Spikes. The selected people are sent into the future for 7 days, and most of them never return. However, the ones who do return are normally skirted for life. Dan is teaching a class when his phone gives him an emergency call telling him that he's just been drafted to be sent into the future and fight the ongoing war. He is sent to the jump facility where he meets with the future workers, and they fit his arm with some kind of bracelet device that can track him while he's in the future, and so that they can bring him back to the present when his 7 days are up. Dan has to comply with what they say. Otherwise, his wife will be drafted instead. Afterwards, Dan heads home and tells his wife, Emmy, about him being drafted. She gets upset and reminds him that if either of them were ever drafted, they would run away. Dan uses the matter, saying he can't run from these people as they are very serious, but she reminds him that Dan's father can probably remove the bracelet. However, Dan has a restrained relationship with his father, James Forrester. And when Dan was younger, he abandoned his mother and left Dan at a young age without any other option. Dan visits his father to get the gadget removed, but while doing so, they end up getting into an argument, and Dan leaves and goes back home. Annie has surrendered to her fate, and his daughter Murray is devastated when Dan tells her he's just been drafted, even though he will be gone for only a week. Nobody knows if he will make it back alive. A few days later, the family says their final goodbyes, and with a really emotional moment with Murray as she begs him not to leave before being teleported. All drafted soldiers are trained for at least 7 days to understand the basics of survival and to give brief information about the White Spike race on the other side of the wormhole. Dan meets Charlie, a fellow soldier. Entering their training, they are put into groups, with Dan and Charlie being in the same group. They also come across a man called Dorian Dorr, has been drafted 3 times already and has faced the White Spikes in combat and has defeated one of the first White Spikes, keeping a tooth of the creature around his neck. They all train for a day and then take the next day off. Charlie and Dan talk about their loved ones back home, and then suddenly the alarms go off and all personnel are ordered to get ready to get sent into the future. The reason for the sudden announcement is because the last research center in the future is currently under attack by the white spikes, and the research center holds all the information about the alien race, so they must hurry the next group of soldiers to be deployed right away. They are then all sucked into the wormhole and sent to Miami in the year 2051. But after being teleported through, they are all dropped from a great height after the system had failed while traveling through, and many don't make it to the ground. However, Dan, Charlie, Dorian, and Nora Cowan are among the few that survive safely. Landing in a pool above Miami Hotel after landing, they count the survivors' emission control updates, the team to a search and rescue operation instead, as they have just had some new intel reporting that the research facility has been breached and they need to save the remaining survivors in the research laboratory. Dan is appointed as the team leader of one of two teams by the colonel who is on the mission. Dan orders the group to follow him into the building, which they do, all while keeping an eye out for the white spikes. Upon reaching the facility, they inform the colonel that the research center has been breached on the top floor and there are no remaining survivors to save. With that, the colonel tells Dan to secure the hard drive with the white spikes research information and the critical samples that they need. However, because the area is completely filled with white spikes and there are no remaining survivors from the facility, Mission Control chooses to destroy it. Fighter planes are now sent out to finish the mission instead, and they apologize for sending the group into the middle of a war zone with no choice. The fighter jets must throw down bombs to wipe the alien creatures from the city. Dan collects the samples, but now only has 6 minutes before they blast the entire area. After collecting the samples, Dan and the group start descending the steps. However, on their way down, they look back up to see a white spike following them. With an arrow from its limbs, it quickly kills one of the soldiers. The whole team begins firing at it, and right after, more of these creatures emerge from the walls and begin chasing them down. They quickly rush downstairs as the aliens were chasing them after seeing the weakest people in the team get taken out by the white spikes. Dan decides to confront the creature, causing it to flee for a brief moment. Eventually, the stairwell comes to an end, and the remaining people of the team make it through to the passageways. Dan orders his team to find a way out while he faces one of the white spikes head-on. He keeps shooting at it and fires over and over again, however, to no gain. He then runs out of ammunition and then comes across an axe. He tries but fails to hit the white spike with it, but Dorian and the team arrive just in time to save Dan. The bombing will start in only 3 minutes. In Mission Control, they dispatch some Humvees to their aid. All the team has to do is make it to the Humvees, and they will be saved. The streets are overrun by white spikes. They soon spot the Humvees, but it's all too late, as they have just been taken out by the white spikes as the bombing of the city begins. They continue to run and find a safe location, and while the others flee, Nora and Cowan continue to fire at the monsters, and everything turns black as the city catches fire. After the blackout, Dan wakes up in a Dominican Republic encampment, and only Dan, Charlie, and Dorian were able to make it out alive. After waking up, he's nonchalant about being killed. A soldier then summons Charlie and Dorian as they've been put on a new assignment. On the other hand, Dan has been called in by the colonel, who discovers it is his daughter Mary Forrester from the future. Dan attempts to hug her, but she falls back and says it's best that they don't get too close, or it could destroy the mission. She tells Dan that she has a PhD in biotechnology and was named the research team's head. Dan is extremely proud of his daughter's future, and Rashid has become an afterthought. Mary tells Dan that she was the one who made sure he got drafted, as she needs him on an important mission to apprehend a female white spike, as that is the only way they can destroy the alien species on their journey. She informs Dan that white spikes have no other intentions other than destroying the human race, and they are not here to gather any intel or use to govern humanity, but rather we are just simply food for these creatures, and they are always extremely hungry and have now spread to many different parts of the world. After Dan, being curious about his own future, asks about the future, Murray asks how he had died and what happened with Mary and her mother. However, Murray doesn't continue the conversation. They arrive at the cave containing the female white spike, and they are extremely rare compared to the males, and the females are breeding all the male white spikes, which is why they are the problem. However, the males are always safeguarding the females at all times. A group of soldiers try to apprehend the female, but she ends up killing the majority of the soldiers. Miri orders Dan to remain in the helicopter while she goes down and tries to stop a female white spike. During the battle, the white spike almost kills Miri. At that moment, Dan sees many other male white spikes rushing towards the cave to help save the female. Dan makes the decision to go down into the cave and help protect his daughter from the incoming threat and saves Murray from the white spikes. And they imprison the female in a giant cage tethered to a helicopter and take off. However, some of the white spikes manage to take down one of the helicopters, and white spikes are approaching from nearly every direction. Suddenly, the helicopter they were clinging onto crashes, but the two of them survive by driving the Humvees to a nearby shore. While on the beach, Maury reveals to Dan what happened to their family, and she tells Dan that he left her when she was only 12 years old, and he also divorced her mother and left them. Dan promises that he would never have left them, but she explains that he didn't enjoy his life and chose to leave after they were then picked up at a helicopter, and they transport the female white spike to the main facility in the middle of the ocean. The female is sedated and moved to a lab the next morning. Yuri intends to use the samples from the female white spike to develop something that would completely eliminate the alien race. Dan visits Mary's lab and wants to help her with the solution. Mary explains that they already have a sample which is effective against males, but it would never work on females as they are much less affected by the current solution. So they need to find a stronger dose which will work on the entire species. But if they discover the right poison, they need to mass produce it and find a way to spread it across the world. Murray figures out a plan which includes Dan taking the toxin back in time and then using it on the first ever white spike ride as they invaded Earth, thus saving the entire world. But Dan still doesn't want to leave Murray Pine to die right then. The computer reads that the poison was 100% effective moments after the female white spike starts to growl and asks if it is to release herself from her shackles. Furthermore, an army of male white spikes arrive, and hundreds of thousands of them storm the facility trying to save their female white spike. Mary quickly gives Dan the poison to go back in time and puts him on a helicopter. Finally, the jump link is activated, and the crew's entire mission is to help Dan get to the jump link securely while they rush toward the teleporter. The males find the female and manage to set her free. There's only 5 minutes remaining before the jump link can successfully be used, but the males have infected the entire area, and Dan and Murray are completely surrounded by them. While they get closer to the jump link, they manage to fire at many of the white spies. However, their numbers just keep growing and growing. One of the creatures hits Murray with an arrow, knocking her down right as they were about to get onto the chopper, while Dennis is to Murray. The whole structure completely erupts with fire. Murray is unable to move due to her injuries, and right then a white spike pulls her away. And this is when the two say their last goodbyes to this world. Dan is pulled back into the past with a sample of poison, while Murray is falling into an ocean of white spikes. Several other soldiers make it back to the present, but when they place Stay on the stretcher, he tells them he has the poison. But they tell them it's useless, and they can no longer get to the future and mass produce it as they jump. Link is damaged even if they manage to mass produce it in the present. They can't get back to the future in 2051 and destroy the creatures there. Charlie almost returned, and Emmy is seen waiting outside the building exit for Dan. Dan seems to be disturbed by all that has happened and doesn't mention a thing to Emmy. A young Murad is seen waiting with her welcome home sign and tells Dan she made it the first day he left. When Dan gets home, he embraces Murad and stays by her side at all times, thinking about the events he just witnessed while in the future. After some time, he tells Emmy that Murray was the one who found the poison to defeat the white spikes. Dan now wants to figure out the location of where the white spikes came from and use the poison to wipe them all out before they invade the whole Earth. Dan visits a bar to see Dorian, who agrees to help him on this mission after they see Charlie working in his lab, and ask him to examine the claw that Dorian took from the white spike. They come to find out that the alien species have been hibernating in ice for thousands of years under a glacier in Russia, and that they started to fall through the ice and climbed up to the Earth's surface. They take the information to Mission Control and ask them to fly over to the glacier and stop the creatures before they wake up. but they tell them it's impossible to set up this mission as all the assistants from the UN have stopped, and the world is in chaos. Dan makes the final decision to ask his father for help, as he's an engineer with connections and also happens to be a pilot who can fly undetected after his father finds them a plane and gets ready to take off. And this is when Lieutenant Hart and a few from the Future Workers team join them on their expedition. They make it to the glacier and travel uphill in order to find some kind of proof of white spikes. When they get far up, they notice their gadgets starting to shut down and are being interrupted by a magnetic field coming from a quarry from miles below. The crew descends into the glacier, and down below, they discover a terrestrial spacecraft containing the white spikes when they are only babies. Upon reaching the spacecraft, they conclude that the white spikes are not aliens, but weapons made as a planet-clearing ploy. They proceed to inject the toxin into a few of the white spikes, but this triggers the others to wake up. Dan is thrilled that the toxin his daughter made actually works, but many of them escape before they can implant them with the poison. The monsters flee the cave where Charlie and Dan's father is fighting them while in the ship. Lieutenant Hart notices many other pods containing thousands of white spikes, and they have no other option but to manually blow up the spacecraft after detonating the explosives. They kill all the white spikes except for one, which ran away, who happens to be the female white spike. Dan, his father, and Charlie are the only ones remaining now, and they chase after the white spike who has fled from the scene. Dan and his father finally track down the female and open fire at her. She then falls down a cliff while trying to save herself from the bullets, but she was not done, as she comes back again and brings Dan down to the ground. They try over and over again to use the toxin, however, to no gain. His father tries to sacrifice himself to save Dan, but as the white spike approaches his father, Dan jumps on top of it and finally uses the last toxin to kill the creature. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and want to see more, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss a future video. And until next time, guys, take care.